the goal or the agenda for this presentation and demo is to share some of the best practices to how to deploy at scale, right? When it comes to QuickSight, and how can you make QuickSight fit into your own CI/CD sort of infrastructure you might already have, right? We did the intro, so I'm Mayank, I'm the product manager, and then we have Arun here, who's our principal SA. Just real quick through the agenda. I'm gonna skip intro and QuickSight assets. This group is familiar, so we'll start with common deployment use cases, which is what we see in field, what we see from our customers, what we hear from them, what are the common use cases there, and then we'll go through some, what we have, what we offer today to make that happen. So we have asset as bundle and event bridge. We'll go through those overviews, and when it comes to scale, the proposal here or the recommendation here is to use folders, shared folders. So we'll go through what are those folders, how do you use these folders. These folders are not regular Microsoft like Windows or Mac folders, right? And then how to use the folders for deployment, and then we have a demo and do Q&A at the end. So I'm gonna skip first two and just jump into directly to QuickSight, the deployment, common deployment use cases. Actually, this might be useful. Let me just quickly go through it. So when we talk about QuickSight deployment, we talk about how to deploy QuickSight assets. And the way we think about it is in two categories: core assets and core assets are basically the assets which gets created by your users and which are core as in they are needed for your BI use cases, right? So we start with data sources, which is connection to your enterprise data, right? And from data sources, we create QuickSight data sets, right? Where you ingest if you're using Spice, you ingest the data, or use direct query, and then authors create analysis on top of using the data in the data sets, and there are teams with these analysis which help with aligning look and feel of the visuals or the content in the analysis or in the published dashboard, and then analysis returned into a dashboard, right? And then templates are something which we launched a few years ago. They are the metadata of the analysis, and they can be used for porting analysis and dashboard from one account to another, right? And then we have quick topics. Topics are more for Q&A, Gen AI capabilities. So you create topics on data sets which let you ask questions in plain natural language, and you'll be respond in the form of a visual and some narrative. And then all of these assets can be placed in a shared folder today, right? And that's why I wanted to go through this to make sure when we say folders, what will these folders contain, could contain, right? And then eventually, so that's what we'll be using for deployment. And then finally, we have data stories, which we launched last year. They are another Gen AI feature we have, right? So data stories are not part of folders today, including and themes and templates as well. And then when I said two categories, core assets are what on the right, but then we also have auxiliary assets. We call them auxiliary because they are actually attached to these core assets. So refresh schedules are something used for ingestion, right? Data ingestion into our Spice, which is our in-memory data engine, right? So you can create schedules, and based on those schedules, the data gets refreshed. And then VPC connections are the connections to your data source, your enterprise data. Okay. So let's jump into deployment, right? So the idea here is to go through what are the common use cases we see across our customer base. Now, this is not exhaustive. I'm going to go through I think 3 use cases, but there could be more. We'll be happy to hear if there is a different use case you might have seen or you might know about or you might want to talk about. That's completely okay. But this is to give you an idea when we talk about deployment, what are we seeing how customers use or set up QuickSight, right? Because deployment will, how we do deployment will have an impact on it. So a lot of our customers just use single AWS/QuickSight account, right? And these are mostly smaller enterprises or even ISVs, right? So in their case, they will basically have one account where they will have BIEs or BAs developing all these all the assets there, right? And then they'll use the same account for staging. Now they can use naming convention, or they can keep the asset name as same and just say, okay, I'm ready now. Let's stage. Staging means it could be for UAT or for somebody to go and validate. And then again, the same account is used for production assets as well. These are like smaller teams or smaller organizations which do not have the need to create multiple accounts in multiple regions, and they don't have that many assets either. So they would have like few dashboards, maybe 10, 20 dashboards, not in hundreds or thousands. Now, within the single account, we also have customers who will have multi-region sort of configuration. So they will use region one, let's say US East one, for development, and they have customers they are serving in US East one, right? So they will use the same account, same region for production or for giving access to their customers, right, or to their users. Now, they may have a need for the secondary another region, let's say in Europe or in Canada, where there are data regulations, data compliance, where data needs to stay in those regions along with their assets. So in that cases, they will deploy these. They will use the same assets which were developed in US East one, and then deploy the same assets in the other region, and then there these assets will talk to the data in that region. So it's more of a multi-region sort of configuration. So more for like global customers. And then the third use case we see is multi-account. So this is mostly large enterprises or ISVs. They could have they have much larger global presence, right? In their case, they will have actually multiple accounts. So they will have a big team of developers, BI developers, who will have their own development account. They go through like they try to use the SDLC, regular SDLC, and try to use the same process for BI assets development, right? So they will have development account, BI people are developing over there, and then those assets will get promoted to the staging account, which is a completely different account. So the assets get exported and imported to the staging account. That's where they will have product team or whoever the stakeholders will review, make sure testing will happen. And then from staging, they might have multiple production accounts, one or many. So we actually have customers who have three global regions with like three regions for them, and all three regions have its own account, but the same assets are being deployed in all those three accounts. Right. So it's more massive deployment, larger deployment use cases. Now, it doesn't mean they have thousands of dashboards, but it just means that their need is such that they need to have all these separated in different accounts, and because they are serving global customers, right? Um, yeah. So these are some of the common use cases. As I said earlier, during Q&A, we can talk about any other use case you might have in mind, or you might have heard from customers. Uh, Now let's talk about this slide. Uh, Event bridge integration. So we what we have done in last 18 months or so is we have integrated with Amazon Event Bridge. So Amazon Event Bridge is basically a place where where services like QuickSight will emit events, right? And customers can create rules in order to capture those events. So in this case, when it comes to deployment, the goal is to um, to automate that process, where if an author or a BIE is working on some dashboard or critical dashboard, once they are done, they don't need to go and manually tell someone like, hey, I'm ready, my dashboard is ready, go and promote it to staging or production. And what Event Bridge lets them do is it actually uh, it's an event to event bridge. There is some DevOps, or there is a script which can be written to capture that event based on the dashboard ID, right? You can create rules, and then every time a dashboard gets updated or published, the event gets fired, and then automation kicks in where, so okay, this dashboard is ready, it just got published. We can use our asset as bundle APIs to actually export and import to the staging account or production account, take it to the next stage basically. So what we have done incrementally in last 18 months is launch create, update, and delete events for all our core assets, and we are continuing to launch more and more events. So, like for example, you might see topics is missing here, so that is something which is on the roadmap. It'll come soon. But events, in short, lets you basically automate the deployment and let you capture any critical changes or any asset changes which are happening in the account. Along with event, now event let you capture the changes, and this group might be familiar, but asset as bundle is something which we launched 2 years ago, I think. Now, so these are the set of APIs which enable lift and shift, meaning take assets from one account or one region and move them to a different region, copy them to a different region or different account, right? So there are set of APIs. One set API, one set of APIs let you do export. Other set of APIs let you do import. Until November or until October, September, October in 2024, we have these APIs. You would have to say, "Hey, I have this dashboard ID. This I want to export this dashboard along with all its dependencies, meaning analysis, data set, data source." And then you would export and then import into a different account. What we have recently introduced is the support for folders, where if a folder contains, let's say, 5 subfolders, each folder has 1,000 assets. You can just run this export operation and import operation on the parent level folder and say, I want everything in that folder, along with uh, anything these dashboards or these analysis are connected to. So it lets you do that at scale, where you don't have to like individually go to each dashboard and say, okay, I want this dashboard, this dashboard. You can just put everything in one folder, and then just it lets you export and import. And we'll have a demo for that. So just to go through this use case, basically you have account A, right, and you have account B, which is empty right now, and you have these assets which are residing in the folder. Topic on the left is grayed out because topic we don't support topic export import right now. So that's why it's left out. That is something which will come in future. So the idea is that you on this parent folder, you say I want to start asset bundle export job. It will give you including all the dependencies, include all the members, right? And it will, and in this case, it's a QuickSight JSON format. So you have two formats: CloudFormation and QuickSight JSON, right? So depending on your need, you can use either QuickSight JSON. You can actually save the exported files locally on your machine, right? And those are JSON files, literally, right? So you can actually change them, customize, modify them if there is a need, but we don't recommend that, right? So export job lets you export all these assets within the folder, and then literally just call the import API, right? And import API lets you will move or will copy these assets into the destination, either account or the region. We have override options. So the cases where, and like, I'll be surprised if destination and source account has same data connection, but if like in most cases they don't. So override options let you override data connection parameters, for example, right? So you don't have to go then manually change the data connection in that case. You can make it as part of the API call, right? Along with VPC connection and data refresh schedule. So we literally import everything onto the destination account and region. Um, and then same thing happens with the update. So let's say you have an update to the dashboard, right? And sorry, I moved too fast. So on the right, you will see dashboard V1. Now, let's say a dashboard got updated, right? You can actually run the same job, and it will basically instead of overriding everything, it will just copy the dashboard updates, right? And dashboard version 2 will go to the account, destination account region. Same thing. I was talking about CloudFormation format. So CloudFormation, that's an option when you call the API. So if there is a need to use CloudFormation, you can do that. It's the exact same steps, but it's just the way the files are packaged are different, and CloudFormation has a very specific way to package things and specify all the resources. So we follow that standard and then provide the CloudFormation support. But it's the exact same way where you do export and then import, and for update you do the same thing, and from V1 to V2. So so that's so I went through what are all the assets, what are the deployment scenarios, what do we offer to do those deployments at scale or in an automated fashion. Next, we'll go to folders, because we are recommending use the folders to if you want to do this at scale. So we'll go through what folders are, what do they mean, how to use the folders, and then a use case for deployment using folders and a demo. So I'll pass it to Arun to go through that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I'll share my screen here in a moment.
Okay.
Folders is something which we had for several years now, and it's a great mechanism to not only organize your assets, but also to share it with your team. And we will cover one use case that was presented as part of our initial launch blog, which it is very much relevant even now. So I'm just using that to sort of formulate my recommendation for um, asset porting and asset migration here. So let's say we have this fictitious customer, Optank, and there is a top level folder with the company name that the admins create. So QuickSight admins create this folder. They are the owner of this folder. And let's say the C-level execs in Optank wants to have access to all the different reports that's out there. So the admins add them, the C-level execs, give them viewer rights on the top level folder. Now, there are different departments within this company, and the admins create separate folders for each of those departments. So they have one for marketing, sales, and finance. So by default, these are created by the QuickSight admins. They are the owners, and they had given viewer rights to this top Octane folder to the execs. That inherited access comes down on these child folders as well. So C-level execs will be able to see marketing, sales, and finance. The asterisk here indicates that we are not going to display permissions on this, but it's the same permissions there. Now, let's say there is a different analyst team who works on marketing set of dashboards and reports. So the marketing analyst team can be made the owner of this marketing folder. The admins could grant them ownership, or they could even just make them contributor. The only difference is whether they have rights on that marketing folder itself, whether they can change permissions at the marketing folder level. If the admin still wanted to control that, they could just give contributor rights here. Otherwise, they could give owner rights to the marketing analyst team. Now, this marketing analyst team can go ahead and create subfolders within that. So let's say they create separate folders for assets and dashboards. Assets meaning all their core assets like data sources, data sets, analysis, and even dashboards there. And then dashboards could be published into or moved into this dashboards folder as well. And why we need that separate thing for dashboards, that's a way to organize your consumption side of things. And in this case, they have a separate bunch of users, marketing users who just need to consume the content. So they need to have a different level of permissions, right? They don't need to get access to the data sources and the analysis and such, but they just need access to the dashboards, which is why we keep the dashboard separately. And the marketing analyst team themselves is able to grant access to their bunch of users here to this dashboards folder. Likewise, for sales, let's say there is a regional component to it. Let's say there are separate teams working with US and EU. And in that case, the QuickSight admin team can create further subfolders. And let's say for the US subfolder, they give the ownership permission to the US sales analyst team. And then the same pattern repeats, right? They could create the sales analyst team could create subfolders and they can give permission to their end users to see their dashboards. Likewise, the other departments and regions could be filled out. We can have up to 10 levels of nested folders, so it's pretty flexible and would let you match your organization structure um, closely with these folders. And now, once we do all this, just to drive home the point, so if you see the QuickSight admins, anybody who's part of the QuickSight admin, they will be able to see all these folders. Anybody who's part of the C-level exec group, they can see all these folders because they have viewer rights on the top folder. They inherit the access, and they can see the assets here and consume them. The marketing analyst team, they would just see their marketing folder and the subfolders which they own. The marketing users team would see the marketing top folder and just the dashboard subfolder. And likewise for the US sales analyst and US sales users teams, they would see just the folders that they have access to. Now, this is a great pattern when it comes to sharing your assets. It also can be leveraged to help with content promotion because let's say the marketing users, they are creating content for marketing. They know when to promote their content, right? So let's say, let's just look at that particular example. I'm just putting that part of the hierarchy here. In account A, this is the source account, the marketing user, marketing analyst team has got owner rights on these folders. They created these assets, and once they know this is good to deploy, I mean, they could move the asset dashboard into the dashboards folder as well. And let's say we are getting ready to move it to account B, which could be staging or production. Now, the marketing analyst team knows that this code is good to go, and they could trigger it by creating a subfolder here, right? This is just a pattern that we are recommending because now instead of going to the QuickSight admin team and saying, hey, we have this code ready to be pushed, the admins could do all the setup ahead of time. And once that's all done, the marketing analyst team could just go ahead and create a subfolder. And this could have any name. In my case, I'm looking for this particular string, request code push. It could be initiate deployment for if that's what you prefer, right? It just should match whatever it is that you're filtering for from the events. And this would trigger a folder creation event in Amazon Event Bridge, and that can trigger a Lambda function. Therein, we would go check which folder ID is coming in with the event. And for that folder ID, we can check the folder name, see if that matches our string. So in this case, it matches request code push. So it can, the Lambda function will then trigger AWS code pipeline. And at that point, we can update the name of this folder here. So it was just request code push, which the user created. But once we triggered the code pipeline, we can use this mechanism to sort of provide the feedback to the end user right within QuickSight. So we will update that folder name programmatically, adding a triggering pipeline status along with a timestamp on top of it. And this code pipeline can now go use the asset bundle APIs, and it will find the parent folder for this particular folder which was used to initiate this. The parent folder in our case is this assets folder, so it will start exporting that asset folder using asset bundle APIs. And while doing that, we can again update the status. We can mark it as exporting with a timestamp. And this is a time-consuming process. It could take a couple of minutes, depending on how many assets you have in there. So we could refresh the timestamp in a loop. We are essentially waiting and checking to see whether the job completed or not. And the assets from there can be taken and stored in S3. code pipeline automatically stores artifacts in the configured S3 bucket. That's what I'm utilizing in my demo. You could take it and store it in GitHub or any third-party repo as well. That portion as well, I'll show in the demo. And thereafter, um, we can notify the admin for approval. Now, this is an optional thing. Uh, Again, depending on your each and every org, whether you want to do this approval or not, it would vary, or you might have different admin teams that you want to send for approval depending on which user is initiating this. Um, but yeah, it can be done. So the admin would get notified and the code pipeline will wait for the admin's approval in that review stage. The admin can look at what's changing. And while all this is happening, the status again can be updated. It goes on to say awaiting approval here, right? And then once the admin approves it, we change the status to deploying, and we start using the asset bundle import jobs to import all those assets to the target site. So it can create the folder structure there along with all the assets. And one other thing we could do is, since we are promoting to prod, we don't necessarily want to give these marketing analyst team full owner rights. We could just give them viewer rights. So those manipulations we can do programmatically to the access level that's granted. And once that's done, we could do the same thing for the dashboards folder. So they create the request code push, it goes through the same stages and creates it on the target site. That brings us to the demo. I'll show you a live demo of this. And what are we doing on time? Okay, we have time, 30 minutes close to. So herein, I want to point out that I'm working with two GitHub repos here. I have one where I'm storing all my content, and in storing the content, I'm using the same high-level folder structure as you see in QuickSight. So I have a folder for analysis, I have a folder for dashboards, dataset, data source folders, and so on. And within these, I'll have the JSON files for the various assets. In this case, I have just 3 files here, but think in terms of an enterprise organization, there would be thousands and thousands of analysis and dashboards within these folders. Now, I also have another code repository which I'm using to drive my content pipeline. So that's having the QuickSight service model included here, because the ones that's available in code deploy and code build, code build is a slightly older version. It always takes time to catch up, same as you would have experienced with Lambda. So just to make sure we have the latest APIs available, I'm just packing the QuickSight service model. I have a couple of build spec files here. The build spec.yaml file is what drives the code build layer within your pipeline. You essentially tell what all steps needs to be done. This is just shell commands that you can give. And in here, you could do the entire thing in this build spec.yaml, but I chose to use a Python layer in between just because it's easier to make those API calls and waiting in loop and checking and manipulating the various components therein. And it's just my comfort level as well. I'm more comfortable working with Python for all those kinds of things. So I am using a Python script in between, which I invoke from here. Okay, so we'll go through this a little bit later on as well. And let's just flip over here. In terms of the Amazon Event Bridge rule, we have a content pipeline trigger rule here set up. And that rule is checking for anything coming from AWS QuickSight where the detail type is QuickSight folder created. And once that's triggered, it's going to invoke this Lambda function. And within that Lambda function, flipping over to the Lambda function tab, here I'm cross-checking that it's coming from that expected event. And therein, I grab the folder ID, I do a describe folder to get the folder name from it, and then I cross compare that with my string here, request code push, so that any other new folder that gets created for other reasons, it doesn't trigger this code any further, right? So in here, I'm also taking the user who created this particular folder. I'm taking that using the describe folder permissions API and looking at the principal therein. And also run a describe user for that user to grab the user email. All this is additional metadata that I want to present to the admin in the review phase, so that along with their request for approval, along with the pull request, they also get to see who created this, who initiated this change and their email, so that if needed, they could reach out to them and ask for more details and such, right? And herein we also get the parent folder details. We set those up as variables for the code pipeline and initiate the code pipeline using that. So here you can see it's going into a start pipeline execution, and we update the folder with the status that we are triggering the pipeline. Now, within the actual pipeline, we have multiple stages. We have a source stage. Here in this one, we are not going to pull usually the pattern that you would see is it will be connected to your code repo and whichever code repo that you're trying to update, right? So when I thought about this, thinking in terms of an enterprise organization, somebody who has got thousands and thousands of dashboards, if I were to set that original content repo as the source, it's just going to go through the unnecessary motion of getting the entire source code over into the code build layer as artifacts into this pipeline, whereas all that the particular team might have done is touch one analysis, right? So that's why I'm sort of using that two code repo model here. And what I've plugged in as source here is the one which I showed last, which just has the QuickSight model and this couple of build spec YAML files and the Python scripts for the import and export. So that's what will get pulled into the code build layer as artifacts here, and it will be used to drive the code build execution. Now, onto the QuickSight side, let me show you what's set up. So in here, I'm logged in as my admin user, and I have set up a similar folder structure. This is set up in Ireland region EU West 1. I have the Octang top folder, marketing, finance, sales subfolders. Within marketing, I have assets and dashboards folder. And within assets, I have a data source, data set, and an analysis. And if I go into EU West 2, therein, I just have the Octang top level folder, and that's empty. I do not have any data sets. I do not have any analysis, and I do not have any data sources either. So if I had data sources that should show up at the bottom of this screen, that doesn't show up. So no, none of those assets exist currently in EUS2. Here, flipping over to my next screen, I'm logged in as a different user here in a private browsing window, logged in as marketing analyst. And this particular user, if you see here, I'm clicking into the Ireland region EU West 1, and I'm looking under Octang, I see the marketing folder, right? Whereas in the admin view, you saw that under Octang, there was marketing, finance, and sales, but the marketing analyst has been granted access to just the marketing folder. So true to that setting, the marketing analyst is able to just see the marketing folder. Within that, see the subfolders. Within that, see the assets. Okay. So now in here, let's say as the marketing analyst, I was working on this analysis and it's almost done. It's still in draft stage. So today I want to go ahead and publish this. I take out the draft from the heading and maybe I add a filter. So let's say I add a filter on the region. Filter for this field. Go in here, I apply it to the full sheet, and I choose to exclude APAC data from this. So it's just EMEA and US data. I apply that. So I made that change. I feel pretty good about that change. APAC is gone from this listing, as you can see, and I want to publish this now. So I could go back to my shared folder, and in here, I'm still logged in as the marketing analyst. I know this code is good to go. I just create a folder and I call it. If I refresh the screen now, I should see that name change in a moment. You can see it now. It tells me that it's triggering the pipeline. So if I come back to my pipeline here, I should see that it's running and the export stage is going on. Looking at the details, it's looking at the logs from the code build layer. Wait for that log to come in, but we should see the status change here as well. Once it starts exporting, you see the status changed. And in here, we start seeing the code build logs. So you can see here those files, the build spec, YAML files, the Python scripts, and the QuickSight model folder all got brought in. And it's running the export script at this point. And the export script.python, you can see it will keep updating this timestamp here. So you can see the timestamp changed. And while that's happening, let's quickly look at the export script. Within the export script, we are using the start asset bundle export job, and we are passing in the resource ARN, the parent folder ARN, which is the asset folder in our case. And in here, I'm saying include only one level, meaning it will, we have multiple options with this. We could say none, and it would just create that folder. It will not pull any children. We could say one underscore level, and it will pull the immediate children underneath that folder, and that will exclude child folders. If we say recurse, it will pull that folder, its immediate children. If it has subfolders, it will go pull that, and it will go down recursively as many levels as there is. And I'm proposing that we use one level here because that gives you tighter control over what is being promoted. You are essentially seeing that in your folder view, and that's all the content that you will end up promoting, right? So in here, let's look at the status meanwhile. So you can see the status changed to awaiting approval. That's fine. We will quickly go through what's being done here. So we will iterate while it's in queued status or in progress status. And if the job failed, we update the status in the folder name that it failed. If it didn't, then we go grab that URL. We have a download URL that we get within the response. We use that to download the file onto the code build layer, and then we are expanding that zip folder. We are looking for QuickSight JSON file, which gives a .qs file as the response when you download it, but it essentially is a zip folder. So you could just, if you write that data into your local with a .zip extension, you can unzip it and you can look at the folder structure therein. So in our case, we are going to look at all the files that's there. We are extracting everything into this dev state folder. And then we look at the file names within that. And for each of that file content, we are checking if a folder is not in the file path. meaning it's not a folder, it's some other kind of assets, then we are removing the permissions block from the uh, asset code there, because we are relying on just folder permissions. So if there was anything explicit permission given on a particular asset in dev, we don't just want to carry that over. So we are able to do that programmatically. And if it's a folder, then we check on the permission list of that folder. And if it's an admin, we let that permission go as is. And if it's not an admin, then we force the permission to be just describe folder, which is essentially viewer permissions. So in our case, the marketing analyst had ownership rights on that folder, but once it goes through this code on the target side, they will just have describe folder or viewer rights on that. Then we package up the modified file. We zip it up again for use in the import stage. And in here, we do further steps in. This is for the, this part that we do at the very end is for the code repo part. So herein we are reading out the folders, and we don't necessarily want to include folder ARNs. Each asset definition also will have a section which specifies which all folders it's part of. Now that's important from a QuickSight organization standpoint, but from a true asset definition standpoint, that list of folder ARNs is immaterial, right? You don't really care about that. You care about the true asset definition. So I'm excluding that. I'm popping that out of the asset definition JSONs here. And then when I'm writing it back, I'm writing it with an JSON dump using an intent set to 4. Now this is done intentionally because when we generate the JSON file for the export import APIs, the asset bundle APIs, our priority is to have it as compressed as possible. So we don't include any spaces or line breaks in there. It's, if you look at it, it will look like one jumbled up piece of JSON file. So that, while it's efficient in keeping the file size as small as possible, it's not really nice to just take that blob and put it into a code repo, because the whole purpose you're putting it into code repo is you want to be able to compare your code as you change something later. You want to see which lines changed, were there new lines added, were there lines deleted. You want to look at that diff and find meaning out of it. So for that purpose, I am rewriting this JSON with intent, so it becomes a readable pretty print kind of JSON there. And then it goes on to the next stage. So right now our code pipeline is waiting on that review step, and I would have got an email as well. Let me just see my email here. If that's in here, I will pull that up. Give me a moment. Okay, go into this one. So this email just came through, and it tells me that there is an approval action waiting for my response. It gives me information that this was triggered by the marketing analyst, and this is a dummy user which I created with my own email. So if it weren't, you would see the actual user email here. Now, coming back to this review stage, I also get URL for a GitHub pull request that was programmatically created. So I can click on that and go and see what actually changed, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier, the reason why we want to have well-formatted JSON into your code repo. So I can easily see that earlier I had this marketing dashboard draft. Now it's changed to marketing dashboard. I didn't have any, or rather I had an empty filter group. Now therein I have a filter on the region column, and it contains category values, EMEA and US. That's the change that I did, right? I added region, I removed apart from the list. So it's essentially filtering on EMEA and US. So this all looks good. And as an admin, I'm going to let this go through. And for that, I can go here. I can squash and merge this particular change into my code repo. And now it says it's squashed and merged, and this particular dev branch is safe to be deleted. I could delete it from here, but I'm not going to do that because I'm doing this programmatically as part of my pipeline in the next stage. So I come back here and I say my decision is to approve this and submit. So it will go on to the next import stage. And once it does, I should see the status change here. So yeah, the import stage is kicking off. Let's look at the status. It's just called the import script Python there. And we will see that request code push deploying status came in here. And in here, you can see it's pulling in the build spec stage2.yaml import script .python, the modified bundle file that we changed the permissions and such in, and the QuickSight model file. And then it has kicked off the import script.py. And it's running. And let's say once that's done, it will go ahead and delete the branch that we had used earlier. So if I look here, and you can see the status changed from it's safe to be deleted, it now says the branch has been deleted, right? So coming back here, let's look at the status. It says request code push is completed. So let's go back to I'm flipping tabs here and going into the EU-West2 region and refreshing this. Earlier also we had the top level folder, but it was empty. Now we see the marketing folder is there, within which there is the assets folder, and within which we see the marketing data set and data source. Now, you might be thinking, hey, by the way, you also had an analysis there. Why is it that the analysis didn't come through? Remember that we changed the permissions on the folder. We are giving only viewer rights. So that's why an analysis doesn't have viewer rights. It's only co-owner. So analysis doesn't show up here. But if I go back to my admin view and look at the EU-West2 region, I should be able to see the analysis there. So go on to assets. You can see the marketing analysis came through with the title without the draft there and showing just US and EMEA data, right? So that's the entire end-to-end flow. And in doing this, let's take a quick look at the import script as well. In the import script, we are using start asset bundle import job, and we are passing in the contents of that modified asset bundle. And then we just wait for that to complete in this loop. And once it's completed, if it fails, we update that the status that it failed. And if it's successful, we continue on to the build spec stage2.yaml. And therein we do this additional step of doing that branch deletion. There is one more thing that I want to call out with the build spec YAML for the export stage. I did mention initially that for big enterprises, this content repo will be huge. It will have thousands and thousands of dashboards. So I'm doing a sparse checkout here. So with GitHub, when I'm setting up in this section, right, when I'm cloning the content repo, I'm initially choosing to do a sparse checkout, and it will not bring any of those thousands of assets onto my local at that point. Then I'm going and checking my expanded dev state folder, which is having the contents from my asset bundle, unzipped contents, and therein I'm checking which all JSON files are there. And for those specific files, I'm doing a sparse checkout. So if I have one analysis, one data set, and one data source only, those three specific assets is what I'm lining up to be checked out. And then I create a branch with a unique ID and I check out those specific assets. So that way it's more efficient. We don't waste time in the network layer trying to just pull back huge amounts of data before we can make any change here. And again, we are doing an update only if uh, there is anything that really needs to be updated in here. So if there are no changes detected, then we will just throw that status back that there is no changes found and the request is rejected. We can see that real quick as well. So if I go here, I don't need this request code push folder anymore. I could just delete it. And let's say I create one more folder with this code push, create that. I haven't made any change since my last push, so I should see the triggering pipeline, and then uh, I should see the exporting, and after that I should get a rejected response back. Okay, so and we don't need to wait for this. We could open up for questions at this point, and then I'll refresh the screen in a little bit and show you that it did come through.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And I think it's 11:59. Somebody has to jump, they can jump. I had a super quick question. These demo assets, let's say mostly the repos, are they available internally in a GitLab at the moment or not yet and in the plans?
Not yet. We want to make this available to the field. So me and Mayank, we are trying to put together a blog. That would be our next step.
Okay.
So in the interim, we will at least get this video out, and then I know the code would really be a good stepping block and give people a head start. So we want to get it out there. We'll do a blog with the code bits there. We are not allowed to just share the repo as such.
Right.
Personal repos we are not allowed to share. So
Good. Awesome. I appreciate the help. I don't know if there are a couple of questions, but we answered them or they were answered on the chat. Anybody else has questions for Aaron or Mayank?
and I just refreshed the screen and you can see here the status that it says no change found and it rejected that
Cool.
last chat attempt I made. So
Awesome. Perfect.